The birthday balloons bobbed cheerfully against the vaulted ceiling of the family room, their bright colors a stark contrast to the tension crackling through the air. Dad's 65th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration, but the 30 family members gathered in our childhood home could sense something significant was about to happen. I sat in the corner armchair that had been my spot since I was 12, watching my relatives enjoy Mom's famous lasagna and listening to the familiar symphony of family conversations. Uncle Pete regaled anyone who'd listen with stories from his latest fishing trip. Cousin Maria showed off photos from her daughter's wedding. My brother Jason held court near the fireplace, describing his latest promotion at the investment firm. "Attention everyone." Dad's booming voice cut through the chatter as he stood up, wine glass in hand. "Before we cut the cake, I have an important announcement to make." The room fell silent. Mom looked nervous, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Jason grinned like he knew what was coming. "As you all know," Dad began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "retirement brings many changes. Margaret and I have been doing a lot of thinking about our future." Murmurs of anticipation rippled through the crowd. "We've decided it's time to downsize. This house is too big for just the two of us and frankly too expensive to maintain on a fixed income." More murmurs, these tinged with understanding nods from the other retired couples in the room. "So," Dad continued, his voice gaining momentum, "we've made the decision to sell the family home and move to a nice little condo in Florida." Applause broke out. Several relatives called out congratulations about the upcoming retirement adventure. However, Dad's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "This decision affects more than just Margaret and me." His eyes found mine across the room. "Emma," he said, addressing me directly, "you're 34 years old. You've been living in your childhood bedroom for the past 18 months, supposedly saving money while you figure things out." I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral. "Pack your bags, we're selling this house," Dad announced with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You have 1 week to leave." The room erupted in a mixture of shocked gasps and nervous laughter. Jason pumped his fist in the air. "Finally," he exclaimed. "It's about time Emma learned to stand on her own 2 feet." "Jason," Mom said weakly, but she didn't really object. "No, Mom, it's true," Jason continued, warming to his theme. "Emma's been coasting for years. Living rent-free, no real job, no real responsibilities. This is exactly what she needs." "1 week seems harsh," Aunt Linda ventured. "1 week is generous," Dad replied firmly. "Emma's had 18 months to get her life together. If she hasn't figured it out by now, maybe a little pressure will motivate her." My brother high-fived him, grinning like they'd just solved a major family problem. I sat quietly in my corner chair, processing this very public eviction notice while 30 relatives watched my reaction. "Emma." Mom's voice was tentative. "Don't you have anything to say?" I stood up slowly, smoothing down my simple black dress. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting for tears, protests, or desperate pleas for more time. "I understand," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. "You understand?" Dad's eyebrows shot up. "That's it? No argument? No excuses?" "No argument. No excuses. You've made your decision." "Well," Dad seemed almost disappointed by my calm response. "Good. I'm glad you're being mature about this." "I'm always mature about business decisions," I replied evenly. "Business decisions?" Jason laughed. "Emma, this isn't business. This is family finally setting boundaries with someone who's been taking advantage of their generosity." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "This is about boundaries in business. Speaking of which, Dad, have you spoken with your realtor yet about listing the house?" "We're meeting with Sharon Morrison on Monday," Dad said, looking slightly confused by my line of questioning. "Sharon Morrison from Prestige Properties?" "Yes, why?" "Just curious about your timeline. These transactions can be complicated." "What would you know about real estate transactions?" Jason scoffed. "You've never owned property in your life." "True," I said simply. "I've never owned property under my own name." The family exchanged glances. Uncle Pete chuckled. "Emma, honey," Aunt Linda said kindly, "maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Time to spread your wings and find your own place." "Maybe it is," I agreed. What none of them knew was that 6 months ago, when Dad had missed his third consecutive mortgage payment, the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. What they also didn't know was that I had purchased the house from the bank through my investment company, Meridian Holdings, for $340,000, significantly less than its $580,000 market value due to the distressed sale conditions. For the past 6 months, my family had been living in a house I owned while continuing to believe they owned it themselves. I'd been quietly paying the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs while they assumed their mortgage payments were current. I'd let them maintain this fiction because I'd hoped they would eventually ask for help instead of pretending their financial problems didn't exist. But pride, as I'd learned, often trumps practical solutions in family dynamics. "Emma," Dad said, his tone softening slightly, "I know this seems harsh, but it's for your own good. You need to learn independence." "I appreciate your concern for my development," I replied. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Mom asked, maternal worry finally overriding her support for Dad's tough love approach. "I'll figure something out. You could stay with us for a few days," offered my cousin Sarah. "Just until you find an apartment." "That's very kind but unnecessary." Jason shook his head in amazement. "I have to give you credit, Emma. I expected tears and drama, but you're actually handling this pretty well." "Thank you." "So what's your plan?" Dad asked. "Job hunting. Apartment searching." "I'll start with apartment searching." "Good, Emma. When you do find a place, make sure it's something you can actually afford. No more living beyond your means." "Absolutely. I'll live within my means." The party resumed after that, but with a different energy. Relatives approached me throughout the evening with mixture of sympathy and advice. Most seemed to think Dad's approach was harsh but necessary. A few offered guest rooms and job leads. I accepted their kindness graciously while privately marveling at how completely my family had misunderstood both my situation and my capabilities. As the evening wound down and relatives began leaving, Jason pulled me aside. "Emma, I want you to know I support what Dad did tonight." I gathered that from the high five. "Look, I know it seems mean, but you've been drifting for years. Ever since college, you've been bouncing between temporary jobs and living situations. Mom and Dad have been enabling you." "Enabling me how?" "Letting you live here rent-free. Not pushing you to commit to a real career. Treating you like you're still a teenager instead of a grown woman. And you think evicting me will solve these problems? I think it will force you to grow up. Sometimes people need a push. What if I don't need a push? What if I need something else entirely?" "Like what?" "Like being seen clearly instead of being seen through assumptions." Jason frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe the problem isn't that I haven't grown up. Maybe the problem is that you've never bothered to find out who I grew up to become." "Emma, you live in your childhood bedroom and work part-time at a coffee shop." "I work remotely as a consultant. The coffee shop is just where I like to work because I enjoy the atmosphere." "Consultant for what?" "Financial systems analysis." "What does that mean?" "It means I help companies and individuals optimize their financial strategies and recover from economic difficulties." Jason stared at me. "Like what kind of companies?" "The kind that pay me enough to live anywhere I want." "Then why are you living here?" "Because 18 months ago Mom called me crying about Dad's business failing and their mortgage going into default. I came home to help." "Help how?" "You don't have money to help with a mortgage." "Jason, what do you think I've been doing for the past 18 months? Living rent-free and working at a coffee shop. I've been restructuring Dad's business finances, negotiating with creditors, and implementing recovery strategies to save his company." "That's impossible. Dad never mentioned you helping with business." "Because Dad never asked for help. He's too proud to admit he needs assistance, especially from his unsuccessful daughter." "So how are you helping?" "Anonymously. Through shell companies and third-party arrangements. Dad thinks his business recovered because of his own improved decision-making." Jason's mouth fell open. "The mortgage situation was more complicated," I continued. "By the time I realized how serious it was, foreclosure was inevitable. So I bought the house through my investment company." "You bought this house?" 6 months ago. For $340,000. The bank was motivated to sell quickly." "Emma, where did you get $340,000? "From my consulting business. I've been doing financial recovery work for 8 years. My client list includes Fortune 500 companies, investment firms, and government agencies. Government agencies? Treasury Department, Federal Reserve Bank, Securities and Exchange Commission. When financial systems fail, they call people like me to fix them. Jason sat down heavily on the porch steps. Are you telling me you're rich? I'm telling you I'm successful at work that you've never bothered to understand because you assumed it wasn't important. But you live so modestly. I live according to my values, not my bank balance. I prefer substance over display. Emma, if you own this house, then Dad can't sell it. Correct. And when he tries to list it with Sharon Morrison, she'll discover that Robert Chin is not the legal owner and cannot authorize a sale. What will happen then? That depends on what Dad wants to happen. What do you mean? I mean he'll have choices to make. He can continue living here and we can work out a rental arrangement, or he can move to Florida and I can rent the house to someone else, or he can buy it back from me if he has the resources. Do you want him to buy it back? I want him to acknowledge that I've been helping him for 18 months instead of being a burden on him. Why didn't you just tell us the truth? Because you never asked. You saw me working at a coffee shop and assumed that was my career. You saw me living in my childhood bedroom and assumed I couldn't afford my own place. You created a story about my life and then criticized me for the story you created. Jason was quiet for a long moment. Emma, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? For assuming you were a failure without ever asking what you actually do for work. And for supporting Dad's decision to kick you out of a house that you actually own. And for high-fiving him when he humiliated you in front of the entire family. Thank you for saying that. What happens now? Now I go pack my bags as instructed. But you own the house. I do. But Dad asked me to leave and I respect his right to make that request, even if he doesn't have the legal authority to enforce it. Where will you go? I have a condo downtown. I've been keeping it as an office and guest space. So you do have your own place. I have several places, but this house is my family home, so I wanted to be here while I helped Dad recover from his financial crisis. And now I'll finish helping him from a distance if he wants help. If he doesn't want help, he can figure out his situation independently. The next morning, I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. 18 months of living at home reduced to about what you'd take on a long vacation. I'd learned to travel light during my consulting years. Mom knocked on my bedroom door as I was zipping up the last suitcase. Emma, honey, are you really leaving? Dad asked me to leave. I'm respecting his wishes. But you seem so calm about it. Aren't you worried about where you'll live? I'll be fine, Mom. I feel terrible about last night. The way Dad announced it in front of everyone was unnecessary. Dad has been under a lot of stress. People don't always make the best decisions when they're stressed. Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. Jason told me some things this morning that don't make sense. He said you've been helping Dad with his business problems. I have been. But how? You don't know anything about Dad's business. Mom, what do you think I do for work? You work at that coffee shop downtown. I work remotely as a financial consultant. The coffee shop is just where I like to work because I find coffee shops more inspiring than traditional offices. Financial consultant for who? Companies and individuals who need help recovering from economic difficulties. Like bankruptcy? Sometimes bankruptcy, sometimes restructuring, sometimes just better financial planning. Every situation is different. And you've been helping Dad? For 18 months, yes. Without him knowing? Dad never asked for help. But I could see the business was struggling, so I found ways to help anonymously. Emma, I don't understand. If you're successful enough to help Dad's business, why have you been living in your childhood bedroom? Because 18 months ago you called me crying about the mortgage going into foreclosure. I came home to help. Mom sat down on my bed looking dazed. Are you telling me that we've been treating you like a failure while you've been saving us from financial ruin? I'm telling you that you've been treating me according to your assumptions instead of asking about my actual situation. Oh my God. Mom put her face in her hands. Emma, I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize for making assumptions, Mom. You need to apologize for treating me badly based on those assumptions. We did treat you badly, didn't we? You treated me like someone whose opinions didn't matter, whose work wasn't important, and whose presence in the family home was a burden rather than a choice. But if you could afford your own place, why didn't you just move out? Because I thought my family might need my help. And because I hoped that eventually, you might ask what I actually do for work instead of assuming I'm unsuccessful. We should have asked. Yes, you should have. Mom was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Emma, what happens now? With the house, I mean. Dad's planning to meet with the realtor tomorrow. That's between Dad and the realtor. But if you own the house, then the realtor will discover that Dad doesn't have the legal authority to sell it, and Dad will have to decide how he wants to handle that information. Could you let him sell it anyway? Transfer ownership back to him so he doesn't have to know. I could do that. Would you? That depends on whether Dad wants to acknowledge what's actually been happening for the past 18 months. What do you mean? I mean, if Dad wants to continue believing that his business recovered on its own and that his mortgage problems resolved themselves through his improved financial management, then I'll facilitate that fiction. But if he wants to understand how his problems actually got solved, then we need to have an honest conversation. What kind of conversation? The kind where he asks me what I do for work instead of assuming he already knows. I finished packing and loaded my car while Mom watched from the front porch. Dad was in his office, probably preparing for his meeting with Sharon Morrison. Emma, Mom called as I put the last bag in my trunk. Will you still come to family dinners? If I'm invited. You're always invited. You're our daughter. Mom, last night Dad kicked me out of the family home in front of 30 relatives because he believes I'm a financial burden. That's not how you treat someone you consider family. He was just trying to motivate you. He was trying to solve a problem he doesn't understand using a solution that doesn't address the actual issue. What is the actual issue? The actual issue is that for 18 months I've been helping this family while being treated like I'm hurting this family. That's not sustainable. So what would make it sustainable? Being seen clearly instead of being seen through assumptions. Being valued for who I am instead of criticized for who you think I am. I got in my car and rolled down the window. Mom, I love you and Dad. That's why I came home to help. But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect, and help doesn't mean hiding who I am to make other people comfortable. Where are you going? To my condo downtown. I'll text you the address. Emma, wait. What should I tell Dad when he finds out about the house? Tell him the truth. Tell him his daughter owns it because she was trying to help him, and now he has to decide whether he wants help or whether he wants to maintain his pride. I drove away from my childhood home for what I thought might be the last time, though it turned out to be the first time I left on my own terms instead of being pushed out by circumstances or family pressure. My downtown condo was a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd bought it 3 years ago when my consulting business reached the point where I needed a professional space for client meetings. The second bedroom served as my office, equipped with multiple monitors and the kind of technology setup that would have surprised my family if they'd ever seen it. I spent Monday morning catching up on client work and preparing for a conference call with the Treasury Department about a municipal bond recovery project. At 10:30 my phone rang. Emma. Dad's voice was shaky. Could you come home? We need to talk. I don't live there anymore, remember? Please. Just come for an hour. Sharon Morrison just left and I'm very confused about some things. What kind of things? Things about who owns this house. Ah. Emma, did you buy our house? Yes. When? 6 months ago when the bank foreclosed. Why? Because you and Mom live there and I didn't want you to become homeless. Silence. Emma, I need to understand what's been happening. Could you please come explain it to me? Dad, for 18 months I've been trying to explain things to you. You've never been interested in listening. I'm interested now. Why? What changed? I found out I don't own my house. That's a pretty significant change. Dad, do you want to understand what I actually do for work or do you just want to understand the house situation? Both. Everything. I think I've been very wrong about some things. You've been wrong about most things. Will you help me understand? I'll be there in an hour. When I arrived, both parents were sitting at the kitchen table looking shell-shocked. Dad had papers spread in front of him, mortgage documents, bank statements, and what looked like the foreclosure notice he'd apparently hidden from Mom. Emma, he said as I sat down, I owe you an apology. For kicking me out? For everything. But start with kicking you out of a house that you own. Dad, legally I own the house. But emotionally it's still your home. You raised your children here. You have 40 years of memories here. Ownership papers don't change that. But you bought it because we were going to lose it. Yes. And we didn't know we were going to lose it because I didn't tell anyone how bad our financial situation had become. Right. Emma, why didn't you tell me you knew about the foreclosure? Because you didn't tell me about the foreclosure. You were handling it privately, so I handled my response privately. Your response was to buy our house. My response was to make sure you didn't become homeless while you figured out solutions to your problems. Dad put his head in his hands. I've been an idiot. You've been proud. There's a difference. Emma, Mom said quietly, we need to understand what you do for work. Really understand, not just assume. So I told them. About graduating with an MBA in financial systems analysis. About starting my consulting practice at 26. About building a client base that included major corporations and government agencies. About specializing in financial recovery and restructuring. I showed them my home office, my client testimonials, my revenue reports. I explained how I'd been anonymously helping Dad's business recover by connecting him with better suppliers, more efficient systems and strategic partnerships that he thought he'd discovered independently. You've been running my business for me, Dad said when I finished. I've been providing guidance while letting you maintain ownership and decision-making authority. Without me knowing. Because you never asked for help and you wouldn't have accepted help if I'd offered it directly. Why not? Because 18 months ago when I first suggested some financial strategies that could help your business, you told me to stick to coffee shop work and leave business to people who understand it. Dad flinched. And when Mom mentioned their mortgage concerns and I offered to review your financing options, you said you didn't need advice from someone who'd never owned property or understood real financial responsibility. Oh God, Mom whispered. So I decided to help indirectly rather than argue about my qualifications. Emma, Dad said slowly, if you're successful enough to buy houses and run consulting firms, why have you been living like you're struggling financially? I haven't been living like I'm struggling. I've been living modestly. There's a difference. Explain the difference. Struggling means you can't afford what you need. Modest means you choose not to display what you can afford. Why would you choose that? Because displaying wealth often changes how people treat you. Some people become resentful. Others become opportunistic, most become less genuine. So you've been hiding your success. I've been living according to my values instead of my bank balance. What are your values? Substance over appearance. Impact over image. Relationships over status. Dad was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Emma, I kicked my successful daughter out of her own house because I thought she was a failure. You kicked your daughter out because you made assumptions about her life instead of asking questions about her reality. That's even worse. It's fixable. How? By starting to see me as I actually am instead of as you assumed I was. And how do I do that? By asking questions instead of making statements. By showing interest in my work instead of dismissing it. By treating me like an adult whose choices might be intelligent instead of like a child whose choices need correction. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Emma, can you forgive us for being such terrible parents? You weren't terrible parents. You were confused parents who made assumptions instead of asking questions. Can we start over? We can start better. What does that look like? It looks like you asking about my life instead of assuming you understand it. It looks like respecting my choices even when they're different from what you choose. It looks like treating me like an equal member of this family instead of like a problem to be solved. And the house? Dad asked. What about it? Do you want us to pay rent? Buy it back? Move out? I want you to decide what feels right to you, now that you understand the actual situation. What feels right to me is feeling grateful that my daughter saved our home and embarrassed that I didn't know she was capable of saving it. Dad, I've always been capable of more than you realized. You just never asked what I was capable of. Why didn't you tell us? I tried to tell you. Every time I mentioned my work, you changed the subject or made jokes about coffee shop careers. Every time I offered financial advice, you dismissed it as naive suggestions from someone who doesn't understand money. We did do that, Mom admitted. So I stopped trying to convince you and started just living my life. While secretly helping us live ours, Dad added. While making sure you had the support you needed whether you knew you needed it or not. Dad stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where he'd taught us to throw baseballs and where Mom had grown her prize-winning tomatoes. Emma, I want to buy the house back from you. You can't afford to buy it back, Dad. That's why it went into foreclosure. Then I want to pay rent. You can't afford market rate rent either. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you let me gift it back to you. Gift it. Transfer ownership back to you at no cost. Consider it a delayed housewarming present. Emma, you can't just give away a $580,000 house. I can do whatever I want with my property. But that's an enormous gift. Dad, 18 months ago you gave me permission to move home when I told you I wanted to help with your financial problems. That was an enormous gift too. That was just letting you use your childhood bedroom. That was trusting me enough to let me be part of solving your problems instead of hiding from them. We didn't trust you. We thought you needed help, not that you could provide help. The outcome was the same. You let me come home, which gave me the opportunity to help. And now you want to give us the house. I want to give you the choice. You can buy it, rent it, or accept it as a gift. Whatever feels right to you. Dad turned back to face me. What feels right to me is having my daughter live in her family home if she wants to, and having her parents understand what an remarkable person she's become. And what feels right to me is having parents who see me clearly instead of through assumptions. Can we do both? We can try both. 6 months later, we were all still learning how to be a family that operated on reality instead of assumptions. Dad had accepted the house as a gift and was slowly learning to let me provide business advice directly instead of anonymously. Mom had become genuinely interested in my consulting work and often shared relevant news articles she thought might interest me. Jason had perhaps changed the most. He'd asked me to review his investment portfolio and was consistently impressed by my financial insights. More importantly, he'd started asking questions about my life instead of making assumptions about it. Emma, he said over dinner one Sunday, I've been thinking about that night when Dad kicked you out. What about it? I keep wondering how you stayed so calm when 30 people were watching you get humiliated. I wasn't being humiliated. I was being misunderstood. What's the difference? Humiliation is when people see you clearly and judge you negatively. Misunderstanding is when people judge you negatively based on incorrect information. And you knew the information was incorrect. I knew that Dad didn't have the authority to kick me out of my own house, and that his financial problems were solved rather than pending, and that my presence at home was helpful rather than burdensome. So you weren't hurt by what he said? I was disappointed that my family preferred assumptions over curiosity, but I wasn't hurt by the specific content of those assumptions. That's a very mature way to handle family dysfunction. Jason, every family has dysfunction. The question is whether you let the dysfunction define your relationships or whether you work together to create something healthier. And we're creating something healthier? We're trying to. Some days are better than others. Like most families. Exactly like most families. The greatest victory hadn't been proving my family wrong about my financial situation. It had been teaching them that assumptions are dangerous substitutes for genuine curiosity, and that love works better when it's based on understanding rather than projection. Dad never sold the house, but he did learn to ask questions. Mom never stopped worrying about my future, but she did start trusting my judgment about my present. Jason never stopped being my big brother, but he did start treating me like an equal. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong about who you are. Sometimes it's helping them discover who you actually are, and giving them the chance to love that person instead of the person they imagined you to be. The house remained the family home, but the family became something new. A group of adults who chose to support each other based on reality rather than assumptions, understanding rather than projection, and respect rather than comfortable fictions about who we thought we were supposed to be.